right. This is going to be the audience builder, and we're going to really go through this. It's a 10-page document which will be inside of the Academy, and you'll have access to this. It's a fillable PDF, and it's an exercise that I want you to get really intentional about. This is going to really help you define that audience that you want, in other words, your niche, and then really be able to get a clearly defined message that is congruent with that audience. We obviously have done a lot with story brand and we've heard a lot about that. But I think this exercise really helps you put it together and be able to work through this and then save this document, have it readily available to when you do your editorial calendar for each month. And so I'll go through how that works. But step one is the XY axis of positioning, and you can reference the podcast that I've done on this. You can reference the blog. It's a part one of the roadmap on the MCM website if you need some reference for that. But essentially, this is your positioning, right? I put a couple examples here. These were from my practice. I've got, I think, 5 that I've done. You can have multiple, and as you'll see below, you'll be able to write these out for yourself. But for me, we really wanted to be the expert in pain care or sports injuries in my community. Even more specific, golf injuries, right? Like I use this golf injuries one. A lot of us know Greg Rose. Where would he be on this XY axis, or this, where would he be in this matrix? And obviously he might be off the charts on this. He's transcended the profession of chiropractic. He's done this so well as far as becoming the expert with golf injuries and performance, but you get the idea. For me, I try to position it there. Now, if I came out of school and I wanted to be the expert in golf injuries or pain care and sports injuries, whatever it may be, let's just kind of give an example where we probably will fall, right? Most likely, we're going to be, hold on one second, trying to get this. We're going to be probably right there, right? It's just the reality. When we come out of school, we don't have a lot of experience. We're not clinically sound as we're going to be. It's just the reality. So we're probably in this general and non-expert, which is a tough place to be. Which is why getting out of school is so hard early on. But it's a work in progress. And just like medical doctors graduate school, they go to residency for a few years to get better and to get in the community. But at such a technical type of profession like we are, it takes time to be expert level. And the question is how do we go from this yellow dot here on the bottom left quadrant to the upper right quadrant, right? And that's what the roadmap is. That's how we, from a marketing standpoint, the modern chiropractic marketing roadmap, it does that. It helps you. Obviously, you have to be clinically sound, right? You have to have good communication, and your marketing has to be good. And so, by doing that, you can get that out into the community and position yourself as the expert in whatever you want, golf injuries and things like that. And then the success path in CSA is going to help you do it from a well-rounded standpoint, right? So there's the marketing part, but there's more to it than just marketing. And so that's what we're trying to do, is develop this roadmap for you to go from wherever you currently are in your community to where the ideal would be, where you optimally be able to become that expert in golf injuries. Now, this vertical axis I have labeled as expert, non-expert. You can even change that out, like that could be different as well. It doesn't have to be expert, non-expert. It could be you want to be, like for instance, down here, I put sports chiro, general, vitalist, EBC. So you might want to become a sports chiropractor that's evidence informed or evidence based, right? And you want to position yourself in the community as that. So you can write that out. But what I like about this PDF is you can change these things out. And let me get out of this. Hold on. So I could change. So this is the exercise for you. You could change this out. These are meant for you to fill out here, right? So you can write out whatever up to 6. You don't have to do all 6, but you can do up to 6 of these and you just type it out, right? So you could do expert, non-expert. You might want to be the low back specialist, right? So we could change this out to generalist, something, right? So you might want to position yourself. And then what you do is you just go into this quadrant. And what I want you to do is to be honest with yourself, right? Like, where are you on this? Like, this is where you're going to write out the 4 different axes that you um, want the ideal to be for your practice and for yourself. And so if you want to become the expert in low back, like, again, let's use another example, Stu McGill. He's off the charts on here, expert low back. So where do you think you are in your relative to your community? I don't want you to necessarily compare yourself to Stu McGill because that's a fool's errand, but where are you in expert low back? So you may be, low back non-expert. A lot of people will position themselves that in chiropractic, and so you can just put yourself, just write it, put an X there. That's where you are currently. Then go over and do the next one. Maybe you're over here, right? But you're here, and you'd rather be um, over here. Sorry. There you go. So obviously the further upper right into this upper right quadrant you are, the better. So just be honest with yourself, fill those out. This is going to really help with your positioning and understanding what type of chiropractor and the niches that you want to be known for. Okay, so that's step 1, is to take some time and fill out those XY axes, right? Again, there's some references inside the Academy, which the podcast episode I did, the blog article, it's all right there if you need more information. But step 1 is getting your XY axis of positioning accomplished. Okay. Step 2 is going to be determine the psychographics, right? And again, I did another, there's going to be resources in here as well where I've done some information on the psychographics. So reference that if you need more help. It'll be inside the Academy. But this is where, this is basically personality traits, values, attitudes, interests, and lifestyles of the consumer. This is different than the demographics, right? Demographics can be more of, single white female, 35 years old, college educated, income level of X, things like that. Traditionally, we've thought of that a lot with marketing, whereas the psychographics is more about, again, their traits, values, attitudes, interests, and lifestyles versus putting them into demographics. Now, there will be some carryover and some crossover and relationship stuff. So don't completely get rid of demographics, but we really want to get clear on your psychographics. And so you may, based on your XY axis is over here, and again, I'm going to use it as just an example of me with the golf injuries. Some of the psychographics that I may want are, competitive, active, health conscious, willing to spend on performance gains, right? Something like that. So you can get the idea, that's different types of interests or values and attitudes, definitely lifestyles, right? And so that's, just get clear on those things that, those are congruent with who I want as a patient base, like my ideal patient, what I want to position myself in the community. Those are get really clear on that. You could go to step 3 first and then reverse engineer to step 2. So with that said, like, let's go to the CrossFitter, right? I feel like when I mention CrossFitter, you automatically can pop up the different psychographics of that CrossFitter. And so if you want to target CrossFitters, there's a reason why chiropractors do and why they've been so, historically such a common patient base for a lot of sports chiropractors, because they have a lot of psychographics that are perfect for being a sports chiropractor and having that type of patient. But you could start think about, once I say CrossFitter, you automatically have that person in your mind, even to the point of what they look like, right? And what they wear and how they behave and think. And obviously they're competitive and they're active and they're health conscious. They may not be, the one drawback with the CrossFitter is financially, I feel like because there is some of that demographics that tend to be younger in their 20s, sometimes struggling just to afford their CrossFit membership. So sometimes it could be a struggle to get them to afford your level of care, but that's just a reality of it. But you can see now you want to determine what groups these psychographics fall into. So if I get clear on these, just take these psychographics up here, CrossFitter would be one of them. We do a lot with runners. We do a lot with triathletes. We do a lot with golfers. And then the other thing that we've found, we do a lot with youth athletes. It's a huge part of our patient base, and so you're going to see as we go down to step 4 how we got to navigate the youth athlete thing a little bit. But typically, those youth athletes are competitive, active, health conscious. The parents are willing to spend on health and performance, get back to action, things like that. So those are some groups where that is really a big part of my practice that lines up with these certain psychographics. Okay. And then step 4 is you need to find the congregation points that these groups can be found. And so when I say CrossFitter again, where is a congregation point for them? I mean, heck, they've even named it, right? It's called the box, and that's where you can find these people. Or if it's the golfer, it's the country club, the golf store, things like that. And so this is going to have some carryover in your marketing, but also into your community outreach, which we'll dive into. But what we're going to do next is whatever we wrote as far as our first group. So up here I wrote CrossFitter. You're going to type in CrossFitter there. Whatever your second group is, you would type down there, right? And so you're going to have 2 different types of congregation points for the CrossFitter or any of the groups you pick. Offline, right? The box. Okay. We have a lot of these CrossFit events. We can call them competitions, things like that. So there'll be a couple. Sometimes you have 1, 2, 3. It's not going to be a ton, but we have up to 5 you can write there. Online congregation points. Now this is where, how are we going to find them digitally or online? We got to have a well-rounded approach to growing your practice. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of chiropractors are making, especially young ones, is they think they can build their practice behind a computer. And it's not really the case. I mean, it really is going to help, and it's really going to help your practice be sustainable, but you got to get out there. And so that's why we have the offline congregation points, but we also want to do the online. So CrossFitters, typically maybe more Instagram instead of Facebook, right? So we may find them more on Instagram. But on Facebook, what's cool about Facebook ads is targeting CrossFitters. So if, CrossFitters is a group that you want to target and you're creating content around that, then you could literally run a Facebook ad targeting CrossFitters within a 5-mile radius. And so that's an online congregation point. Facebook, the thing that's beautiful about Facebook is it allows you to get really clear. If I go back up here, psychographics are personality traits, values, attitudes, interests, and lifestyles of a consumer. Facebook allows you to target interests and lifestyles and hobbies, right? So that's an online congregation point of the CrossFitter. And so I want you to get really clear on where you can find some of these. Let's do another example of something I didn't write up on the top, but let's say if you did a desk job, you want to target desk workers at corporations, right? Where are their offline congregation points? Obviously, corporations, small businesses. That's why, like health fairs and health talks and doing some ergonomic assessments at companies is great offline congregation points, right? How about some online congregation points? How about maybe we start thinking about LinkedIn? We're going to find a lot of them. Definitely Facebook ads, right? You can target people. You literally, if you had a huge company around you, like a big one with a lot of employees, 750,000 plus, you could target people that obviously work for that particular company in there. And so you can run a Facebook ads towards that. You could um, target certain types of income levels and professions on Facebook, things like that. So that would be an example of like the desk jockey if you wanted to target that. So right now we're just getting super clear on our audience, right? So this is defining who our audience would be. Now, just because we write out 2 to 6 types of groups we're trying to target doesn't mean we're not going to get patients that are falling outside that group. Like, there's no doubt about it. But you really want to have a niche, and you really want to have an audience that you're speaking to. And if you do really good on that, the other types of patients are going to come as well. Okay, so that wraps up the clearly defined audience. So to summarize it, we've gotten really clear on our positioning that we want to have in our community. We've got very clear on the psychographics that really make up our ideal patient base. We've figured out where those psychographics group into, and then we figured out where they congregate both offline and online. And when you get super clear on that, you're now going to know how to get to your audience. Okay, and so the next step is having that clearly defined message, right? And that's going to, you want that to be congruent with your audience. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to define the problems for each of the audience personas or groups that we chose. So going back to where we were, we had CrossFitters. So we're going to have them back on this list here. What are some of their external conflicts, right? These are the things that would bring them into your audience or be a problem. So we're defining the problem. And remember, the problem, according to the story brand, has 3 parts: external, internal, and philosophical. So external for a CrossFitter might be low back pain / injury. Could be shoulder, could be knee. What are the most, I want you to write down the most common physical ailments that this particular group has, and for all your groups. And like you see down here, you would write down your group 2 and do the same thing. Okay. All right. So now we got to get clear on what are some of their internal conflicts of the CrossFitter if they have a low back injury, right? Can't compete. Some of the ones that are a little bit older feel old. Like, it gets pretty deep. Loss of camaraderie, which I can never spell this word ever. So there we go. Perfect. Spell check. Loss of camaraderie, right? That's one thing about this CrossFit is such a tribe, and they feel like a group, and it's, I mean, if they can't work out, it's a big problem. And so there's a lot of different things with this decreased time in certain WODs, right? They've even named the type of exercise. That's how good CrossFit is done with this type of tribe building / marketing. All right, so then what are some of their philosophical conflicts? They don't want, they tend not to want drugs, right? They usually want natural solutions. They don't want surgery. They do not want to be prescribed long periods of rest, like a lot of orthopedists will do, or primary cares, right? So there's some of those philosophical conflicts that they have. They've got the low back injury, and that's fine, and that's a problem. But what's really happening in their head is like, I'm not going to be able to compete. I'm going to gain weight, whatever. I'm not going to be able to compete, and I freaking don't want surgery, and I better not be told I need to rest for 8 weeks. That's a big type of concern, and that's where we can address that. So this is where you're going to take some time for each of your group and get very clear on their external, internal, and philosophical conflicts, okay? And you'll do that for each of your groups. And then step 6 is applying story to your clearly defined audience. So now you got the clearly defined audience, you're going to apply story to it. And this is where you're going to start thinking this way when you're putting your website together, your one-liner, blogs, videos, public speaking, things like that. So let's break this down a little bit and we'll go from there. The hero, the character, that's going to be that CrossFitter, right? Again, you can pick different groups, just giving you an example. With a problem, we just upstairs there, we just define the external, internal, and philosophical conflicts. So we're clear on that. You're the guide, you're the chiropractor. Now you know what their problem is, and above you've also figured out where they congregate and things like that. You're going to have a plan. So this is like how you, as a quote unquote sports chiropractor or whatever, as a chiropractor, how you're going to have a plan that's going to help them address those external, internal, and philosophical conflicts that is different from what they're getting from their primary care, from physical therapists, sometimes from the orthopedic surgeon, things of that nature. So you're going to have a plan that really is going to help them overcome the problem. You're going to call them in action, right? You're going to have recommendations for them, treatment plan, date visits, self-care, things like that. You're going to guide them through what exercises they can do and they can't do, maybe communicate with their coach, like all these different things that you're going to do to call them to action, which can lead them to success or failure if they don't do it. And so now that's the story that you have. And now we need to figure out where to utilize this story for your practice. And that's step 7. Obviously, your website. We've talked a lot about that, and we've had John Morrison on a module, maybe 2 already. You can develop your one-liner. Here's our one-liner. So too many people struggle with pain and injuries. That's the external conflict. We provide effective treatment that allows you to perform well in life, sport, and work. That's the internal conflict, without pills, surgery, and high costs. That's the philosophical conflict, right? And you can modify that or come up with your own, but come up with your one-liner. This has been addressed in a previous module. So where else can you apply this? Obviously, messaging, blogs is an example of one, videos, video story of transformation, patient communication, public speaking. We recently my associate did a talk in front of a running group that's preparing for a marathon in January. So the training season for that is starting now. It's a running store in the area that puts this on, and he spoke in front of like 40 of these runners, and we story branded his talk to really address, for them, we discussed them and their goals, some of the common external issues like knee pain, foot pain, Achilles issues, whatever, the internal conflicts such as not being able to train, keep up with the training, falling behind, or ultimately not crossing that finish line. So we addressed that. And then we also touched on the philosophical conflicts about, we're not going to, as long as there's no red flags, we're not going to prescribe all this rest for you. We're going to try to treat you while you train. We're going to communicate on maybe some little bit of time off, but not a lot. And we're going to really help get you through this process. And so we, really story branded that talk, and it went really well. So that's an example of public speaking. Patient communication, we've outlined this in the module for the report of findings. So make sure you look at that. That's how you can story brand a short 3 to 5 minute report of findings with your new patients, which can really help get them to commit to the care that they need. So this is the tool that's really going to help you develop that audience and that messaging. And so you can keep this. And then when you go, if I want you to look over the marketing planner that was in December of 2018, and we talk about the editorial calendar. So now what you can do is when you sit down at the end of a month for the next month. So like right now I'm recording this at the end of July. So we're going to sit down at my office and do our August editorial calendar. You can then take this. This is now your full workflow of who your audience is, the messaging you need, right? And so if you say, okay, what blog am I going to write? Well, we haven't done anything on CrossFitters in a while, so let's do CrossFit. But we did one on low back already 8 months ago, but we didn't do anything on shoulder. What's a common shoulder injury of CrossFitters? We've got all that written down right here. Okay, we got shoulder, and then when we write this blog, we're going to make it about them. We're going to discuss around shoulder, but we're going to talk about the internal and philosophical conflicts and get that blog going. And then once you do, or you've obviously story brand maybe a talk in front of CrossFitters, now you can go up and say, okay, now we can optimize those distribution channels of the CrossFitter. So like when you think about the roadmap, which is a module in there, again, The roadmap is you need the fuel, which is your content marketing that's targeting a clearly defined audience, the GPS, which is the messaging, which we just talked about. And then the third one was the vehicle, which is optimizing your distribution channels. Well, now that you created that piece of content, or you got an opportunity to go speak in front of CrossFitters at their box, you know where to get to them, right? And so now you've run that blog and you say, okay, we're gonna obviously email our list with it. We're going to come up with a title that's useful for CrossFitters. We're going to run it on Instagram. We're going to do a Facebook ad targeting CrossFitters. So now you know where your how to optimize those distribution channels. And when you come all the way down here as well, and you've written that blog, you go all the way down, and these are where other areas where you could potentially utilize the story for that CrossFitter. So now if you get super clear on this exercise, this could really help guide you for quite a few months in the content ideas that is going to serve your audience. You know, so many chiropractors are just doing these random acts of content and it's not serving them, right? This is now going to serve you because you're clear on your audience, you're clear on the messaging, and now you can create content and be proactive by doing the editorial calendar that will help effectively market your practice. Okay, so this is the audience builder. I think this is the absolute key to knowing your audience, developing your marketing strategy and plan for your practice, and even the community outreach and knowing where the congregation points offline are for them. And we're going to have a whole module on community outreach, and this is part of it as well. But this is the audience builder, super, super important for your practice. I think, you know, I've been working on this for a while and the concepts and everything, and I sat down and really put together this exercise because I feel like if you get intentional on this, spend an hour or two at the coffee shop working on this, it's going to really help your practice for the long term and get super clear on everything. So I hope this was helpful. We utilize it for our practice, and I'm using this with a lot of chiropractors, and everybody's giving me a lot of good feedback on it. So I hope this helps you out.